And you want this part of your brain working. This is the part of the brain you want working if an 18-wheeler is about to come across the interstate at you at 90 miles an hour. You don't want to think about that, you see. To use the higher order brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, to use that part of your brain to think about the threat could get you killed, because the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, the neocortex here, this part of your brain is the slowest part of the brain. This one back here, hyper fast. Why? It's reactive. You want this part of your brain working. And so triggers are those emotional reactions that we get. Those emotional reactions of fight, flight, or freeze that come from something that happening in the present. Example, a long time ago, I was at a Walmart in the checkout lane, and I noticed the lady in front of me wasn't doing well. She was shaking. I noticed, and she was trying to get her breath together. Excuse me. She looked at me startled, and I said, I noticed that you're struggling. I don't know what it is, but I do want you to know I care. I told her my background as a minister and a counselor. And I said, is there anything I could help with? She said, I don't know. She said, this just came over me. I said, what did? She goes, this feeling. I said, just now? Yeah, but within the last minute. I began to help her process what had just happened. And here it was. We figured it out. A man had walked by us, 30, 45 seconds before. He was wearing a cologne. It was Old Spice. That's all it was. So he walked by us. He was wearing Old Spice. What that did was when he walked by and she smelled the Old Spice smell triggered in her memories stored in the lower order brain of years of sexual abuse by her perpetrator who wore, you got it, Old Spice. So that was a trigger. She is now reacting to something in the present as if it was the issue from the past. But this part of your brain has no concept of time. It doesn't understand time. It just feels. So it doesn't know if what I'm feeling in this moment is about that man or about something else, because it doesn't know. It just feels. And when I helped her figure that out there, standing in line, I was able to say to her, is your perpetrator actually here? She says, no. I said, so ma'am, what really happened was when that guy walked by, it just triggered what we call emotional memory. And sadly, it was pain memory for you. And and she's able to calm down because the truth sets you free. That's how it works. You see, that's how it works. When I am early in my marriage, I'm a very affectionate person. Affection is one of my top 10 relational needs. In the top 3, my top 10 relational needs. And I would reach her, hold Well's hand. But when I would hold her hand, she wasn't very affectionate. She'd pull her hand away. The act of her pulling her hand away triggered an reaction in me. I'd shut down. I'd go and sulk. I'd go into the flight response. All right. I'd shut down, stonewall. Why? Because what I didn't know back in those earlier days was that when she moved her hand, all that was a need for affection. That's not good or bad. That's a human need. But the act of pulling her hand away triggered in me memories of messages that I'm not good enough, that I don't matter, that I don't have value. And that one act triggered in me memories and beliefs that I have around those things. And so then I was reacting to her in the present as if she were those people in the past who sent me those messages. So an emotional trigger really is it's an intense reaction to some event that's in the present or a stimuli that is similar to something in your past. The problem is that part of your brain has no concept of time and it doesn't think. It just feels. It's a reactive part of the brain. You need that part of your brain if a tiger is coming after you. You need that part of your brain if your spouse has a baseball bat coming after you. Got it? You want this part of your brain. However, in healthy, mature relationships, you've got to learn to regulate that part of your brain when it is triggered. Now, if you're thinking about your own life, think about things that get you triggered, all right? When you don't have control, when you've lost control, when you're not getting your way, when your partner doesn't reach out to you, when your boss doesn't give you the same attention that somebody else gets. All of those create emotional triggers for us, all right? And so what happens is we get into these trigger loops, all right? I call them trigger trouble loops. We get into these trigger trouble loops because this is how the brain works. But it also does this in relationship as well. Now, if you can see this couple facing each other. Now, let's take a look at her. You notice there's an emotional trigger. All right, something happened. All right, he does something, he says something. All right, that creates an emotional reaction in her. All right, she has that emotional, Lori Gordon's terms, allergy. Other people have different names for it, but there's that intense feeling, which shows up, let's go down to the bottom there, as a reactive behavior. Now she's reacting to him, all right? Because typically when we see something, we have an intense reaction, right? We have the emotional trigger, and that emotional reaction has a reactive behavior. So now I am reacting to you. Well, here's how it works in the loop, you see. As I am in this reactive behavior, Luella will see my reactive behavior. She actually sees it. But here's the thing. My reactive behavior actually becomes to Luella a trigger behavior, a trigger event. So she sees my reaction, which is a behavior. As she sees my behavior, my reaction, based on the feeling of whatever it is that happened, that triggers in her emotions, which has a reactive behavior. I see her reaction to me, and her behavior, her reactive behavior to me, is another trigger event for me. So now I have another reactive behavior, and you can see it's like a circle. As I get triggered, she gets triggered. And then as she's triggered, I get triggered, which triggers her, which triggers me. And you're off into this cycle. It's a crazy cycle, some people call it. All right. A lot of therapists have names for this. But here's what most people don't understand. Whenever you see something happen and your brain has that emotional, right, whatever it is, fight, flight, or freeze, which has a behavior to it, people think the reactive behavior from the emotions of whatever happened, believe that the event itself is the reason I have the feeling and the reactive behavior, which triggers you and your stuff, which triggers me, and it's just, kind of back and forth. It's like a big loop. But that actually isn't true. What actually is true is this. You'll notice in between the emotional trigger and the reactive behavior is something. It's called thoughts and feelings about the trigger event. Thoughts and feelings about the trigger event. In other words, it's not the event itself that creates the emotional triggers, which has a reactive behavior, which then triggers Luella, which has a reactive behavior, which then triggers me and my reactive behavior. It's actually my thoughts and my feelings about the event. Remember I said earlier that the lower part of the brain has no concept of time. It doesn't know. It just reacts. It's just a feeling. It's a feeling. But what you don't know is that behind that feeling and that reactive behavior, you actually have thoughts and feelings about what they did. And it's the thoughts and feelings about the event that actually creates the reactive behavior. Let me give you an example of the loop. Let's say that Luella raises her voice. That's the behavior, all right? She raises her voice in frustration. So as she raises her voice in frustration, that triggers in me an emotion. I get an emotional trigger. I get emotionally aroused, which then leads to a reactive behavior. I shut down and go silent. And as I shut down and go silent, she sees that. So what does she do? She starts to pursue more. So she starts to talk louder. And as she starts to talk louder, I shut down more. So here is how it really works. You ready? Luella raises her voice to me in anger or frustration, which triggers in me an emotion, the fight, flight, or freeze mind. It's instantaneous. 1, 2,000. You get that, right? Typically, though, we go straight to the reactive behavior. That's instantaneous. But remember what I said? In between the actual emotional reaction and the behavior are thoughts and feelings about what happened. Now let's give it to you the accurate way. Luella raises her voice to me in frustration. So I have this reaction based on my beliefs that when people raise their voice to you, my past learnings is that when people raise their voice, somebody is about to get hurt, which creates feelings of fear and insecurity in me. And that leads to me shutting down and not talking. And when I shut down and don't talk, she sees that, which triggers in her an emotional reaction based on her beliefs and past learnings that when people shut down and talk, you might be getting abandoned, which creates feelings of anger in her. So she talks louder in order to get my attention, which then triggers in me believes that when people start to talk louder, somebody is about to get hurt. So I shut down more and go to the next room, which triggers in her that when people walk away from you, you're really about to get abandoned, which creates more anger, but now fear that she's about to be rejected. So then, what does she do? She pursues me. And when I see her pursuing me, that triggers in me a reaction because I believe, based on my past learnings, that when people pursue you, you know you're about to get hurt because there'd be no reason for them to pursue you. And that creates fear. So I go outside to get away, which then triggers in her not anger, but an emotional reaction that when people walk away from you like that, you are about to be abandoned. And now she's afraid. So she follows me outside, pleading with me to stay, which triggers in me that when people do that, they're manipulating you because they're still trying to control you. You get it? It's this crazy cycle. It's a crazy cycle. It creates craziness for both of you. But all of it is based on our own construction, based on our own histories and our own understanding of what happened in the past. But we have no conscious idea that what's actually taking place in the present isn't about our partner. It's about our history.